This is Glenn Loury at Brown University and bloggingheads.tv, talking with my former colleague, old friend, and the current presidential campaign candidate, Professor Laurence Kotlikoff of Boston University. Larry, welcome to the Glenn Show.
Great to see you and be with you, Glenn.
Thanks, Larry. Okay, so we are in September of 2016. There will be an election in a matter of like 7 weeks or something ridiculous like that. And you are running for president. This is an astounding thing. And I'm honored that you would want to come on the Glenn Show and talk about your candidacy and whatnot. Why don't I just turn it over to you and let you explain to the American people, I flatter myself here, explain to that small sliver of the American people who may stumble across this podcast what you're up to.
Well, your podcast could go viral. I think and that's true also of my campaign. I started in January to write a book about what I would do as president. So I wrote about a 160-page book over about 5 months describing the problems and actually the solutions, which are pretty simple. They fit on a postcard for fixing healthcare, taxes, Social Security, banking, education, climate, what our climate policy should be, and also write about social issues and foreign policy issues in very clear, distinct ways in terms of what I would do as president. So there was no question.
What is that book called, Larry? Excuse me for interrupting. What's that book?
Well, it's called Write Us In. It's on my campaign website is Kotlikoff2016.com. Kotlikoff2016.com.
The book that you're describing, I'm sorry to interrupt, Larry. The book you're describing and the campaign manifesto are one and the same thing?
Well, yeah, it's a writing campaign, and I wrote a platform book, which is posted at the website, which describes exactly what I think needs to be done. Obviously, it has to be done with the consent of Congress, but it's covering all the issues, including how to deal with North Korea and other foreign policy challenges. So I'm running a writing campaign, and here's the interesting thing, Glenn. I'm the only actual writing candidate in the country, because to be a writing candidate and to have your votes counted, you have to get yourself registered, and you have to register in all the states across the country. So that's a very big job. Not every single state requires registration, but most of them do, and that's a really huge job to get that done. So I and my campaign staff have been working on that all summer. We're now
your campaign staff?
Yeah, I have people that have volunteered. So if you go to Kotlikoff 2016, you can right now volunteer. We're going to make you a campaign worker, Glenn. And I've had a lot of press, both national and international. I've had long articles written about me in the Wall Street Journal, Boston Globe, Dallas Morning News, PBS, NPR, Bloomberg, Business Week.
Well, if I may, Larry, if I may, okay. Yeah. You're running for president. Okay, you have some ideas about how to fix the problems of the country. Right. That's fine. I mean, more power to you. You're the only real writing candidate because you're registered. Great.
Okay.
Maybe your ideas are better than somebody else's ideas. You should tell us what they are. But I'm just looking at an election campaign, and I'm just wondering how this effort of yours could have any impact on anything. I mean, and with respect, I'm sorry if that sounds harsh.
Okay, so
it seems like a quixotic undertaking. Again, with respect.
Let me explain, Glenn.
Your name recognition is like,
So I didn't run in a vacuum. I ran in the context of knowing who I would be running against. I knew it was going to be some rather undesirable or deplorable Republican and Hillary Clinton. And the majority of the country does not want either of these two candidates. And a good fraction of the majority strongly dislike both of these candidates. So we have a very unique situation where these two parties who have a monopoly on political power have spoon-fed us probably the worst possible choices we could imagine in terms of having one candidate who's clearly everything that Colin Powell yesterday said, his emails became public, where he described the guy as a pariah, totally unfit to be president,
He
a
didn't have much
racist.
good to say about the other candidate either, did he?
No, he said that she's basically a very prideful, incompetent. That's how she's basically screws things up on a routine basis. And then if you look at their actual policies, there's nothing in terms of any substantive policy, in terms of any details, with the exception of the tax policy, which makes no sense, on Trump's website. On Clinton's website, there's a long laundry list of small ideas, no major reform of anything.
Okay, Larry, I got it. They're bums.
But
they're bums. No, hold on. Let me just ask you this. Do you think that what being president of the United States is having the best policy portfolio? Do you? And moreover, hold on. This is a country of 300 plus million people. I'm sure you're aware of that. It needs to be. Hold on. It needs to be led. We're talking about the head of state and the head of the government. Right. This is not an IQ test. All right. Leading people to war and to death, Larry, requires having inspired and earned the mantle of embodying their aspirations. That's what a campaign is. That's why it takes 18 months. That's why they spend hundreds of millions of dollars. That's why being on those shows, giving those speeches, being in those debates actually matters for legitimating the pretense that you... Hold on, let me finish. You had your chance to talk. For legitimating the pretense that you would govern a country like this. Now, where in your calculations about policy minutia have you factored in being the leader of this country? Because that's what you presume to propose to do. And I'm challenging that, Larry. You want me to take it seriously. I'm asking you, why should I follow you, Larry Kotlikoff? You want to lead the country? Why should I follow you? Not because you're the smartest person in the room. Okay?
I think, well, in our little room, you're the smarter person. I don't think it's a matter of who's the smartest person. I think there's many people who are much more qualified than Clinton or Trump to be leaders of our country. I don't think that either of these people get anything fixed in our country. And what I'm trying to get across, and you need to realize, Glenn, is that we have very, very grave problems that we're being lied about in terms of our fiscal situation. We're talking about really a horrific situation which the parties aren't telling us about because they're trying to keep all the bills off the books. They've succeeded in talking about a molehill relative to the mountain in terms of our fiscal liability. So we're actually fiscally broke. Our Social Security system, by the admission of the trustees report, was put out in July, is 32 trillion in the red. It's 32% underfinanced. The Detroit pensions were 20% underfinanced. The healthcare system is a train wreck. And we need to get everybody covered, but we can't do it with these 4 programs. So if we're going to try and get our fiscal house in order, get people out of poverty, we need the right tax structure. We can't continue with a tax system that's leading companies to move abroad, and that also lets the rich totally escape taxation through techniques that I talked about in the book. So I'm not into sound bites. I thought it was most important for people to actually understand what the hell it is that their president understands about the country and how he would go about or she would go about trying to get it fixed. But I'm happy to be in a debate, go talk to 10,000 people. I've done that, Glenn. I've been in stadiums where I've talked to 10,000 people. Ross Perot years ago invited me to give those kind of talks. I can try and inspire people to the extent possible, but what inspires them is actually the truth. And also solutions, answers. It's not the BS. It's not the sound bites. It's not the pep rallies. It's actually the answers. And that's what I'm bringing to the table. Now, you might think, well, this guy is not counted in the polls. Of course, the polls haven't asked whether or not anybody's voting for me because people are discounting write-in candidates because they don't know about the write-in process, that all it is writing a name in the position that's given on the ballot. So I'm in the same position to be elected as Clinton, for example, except her name is going to be embossed by a machine, a printer, on the ballot paper, and mine will be written by hand by my supporters, my voters. Now, how could I get elected? How could that happen? Well, today, if you go to my website, Kotlikoff2016.com, I wrote basically an open letter to Colin Powell. I said, if you say these 7 magic words, you can transform the country and the future of the country. What are the 7 magic words? I am writing Laurence Kotlikoff in as president. So Colin Powell has a lot of followers, a lot of people that are rightfully impressed by him, and were he to just publicly state that, he could bring millions of people along with him. People want to vote in a pack because somehow they feel that their vote doesn't count unless they're voting collectively. He can bring everybody along. You understand these economics as well as I do, better than I do, I think. The economics of collective action, and that politics here is follow the leader. And Colin Powell is a leader. There are a lot of leaders out there. I could get tweeted by Justin Bieber. He's got 80 million followers on Twitter. So within a couple of days, I could be a national phenomenon. Things could happen. I'm not saying they're super likely, but you've got somebody as impressive as Colin Powell saying he cannot stand either of these two people. They're not what the country needs. What does he have to lose if he says, I'm going to write in Laurence Kotlikoff, and that actually ends up taking half of Trump's voters away, or maybe more? I think the thing that would happen would be that he would split the vote for Trump, and then once that happened, Trump started to decline in the polls, then other people would join in and vote for me as well from the other side. But if he wants to be most effective in defeating Trump, which seems to be his highest priority, then saying those 7 magic words is actually the best strategy, because being another supporter for or endorser of Clinton after he's told everybody what he really thinks of her is not going to help her win. It's not going to matter to her winning or losing, but taking votes away from Trump will matter. And I'm much more likely to do that than to take Trump's votes away from Hillary at the first analysis.
Okay, so I hear 2 things. One is a theory about how you could win, which I do find to be interesting, given the age that we live in, the interconnectivity, social media, and so forth, and this viral thing, this network phenomenon, where a few well-connected actors can have broad influence, and then, of course, there's the exponential multiplication of that when the people influence the people who then influence. And it's a scary possibility, actually, not you, but the idea that someone could inspire a kind of a forest fire of collective sentiment that would get behind someone who parachutes in over the heads of all the established institutions, the parties, and all these vetting mechanisms and whatnot, because after all, I haven't seen your health records, Larry. And I don't know the closets that are buried in the skeletons, I should say, that are buried in your closet. Not that you would have any, but a guy like you could well have some. So I find it as a political sciencey kind of observation that in this globally connected and this very heavily social media saturated world, a person could indeed, it's a long shot, but could indeed pull off something like this. So I get that. And then the other thing that you're saying that I think is interesting here is that you could still have an influence even if you don't win on the election, and you calculate that it might be in a beneficial direction. But I just want to ask you, what are some of these, you say you understand the problems and you understand the solutions. You've rethought financial regulation. You know what to do about health care. Yeah. You got the fiscal situation in check, the social insurance programs. You got North Korea. I mean, I want to hear some specifics.
Okay, so let me first of all say, I'm not saying that I alone can fix the country or that I alone have the right answers, okay? The answers that I'm bringing forth, at least in the domestic area, are the answers of economists, because I've spent years looking at these problems like healthcare. I wrote a book about healthcare. I wrote a book about taxes and tax reform. I've written a book about Social Security. It was in a New York Times bestseller last year. I've written a book about banking reform. But I've done it in the context of talking to a lot of economists who are specialists. So what I'm bringing forth are very simple solutions that I think are consensus solutions of economists. So I'm trying to bring our profession's knowledge to bear here in trying to address our problems. So take healthcare, okay? right now you see that President Obama tried to do a great thing and did do a great thing, I think, relative to the situation, which is that he introduced Obamacare, got many, many millions of people covered, but the way it was set up, thanks in large part to the Republicans' obstruction, it's really falling apart because major insurers like Aetna are withdrawing. And then you have Medicare, which is a train wreck, which is running out of, if you look at the long-term projections, it's going to drive us bankrupt just by itself. And Medicaid.
What is going to drive us bankrupt?
Medicare expenditures, as projected by the CBO. Medicaid expenditures. The whole country, fiscally speaking, is $206 trillion in the red. That's the fiscal gap. That's what's separating the present value of all this projected spending from the present value of all this projected taxes.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. That's 10 times the official debt. So we're looking at the wrong numbers. And were I invited to the debate in a week or so, I would explain to Clinton and Trump, look, the actual number of our debt is not $19 trillion that you folks have been talking about for the last 2 years, but you should have known, if you know anything about fiscal policy, you should know that it's $206 trillion. You should be talking about the long-term fiscal gap. You should talk about...
Let me ask you a question about this, about this very specifically, about transparency, about the real numbers and the fake numbers, about looking in the wrong place, trying to drive through Houston with a map of New York City, this kind of idea, which I've heard you've been saying for many years now. And the question begins with the name Jonathan Gruber. He happened to get mentioned by Trump in a speech recently because it was recycled to Trump's evident, he thinks it would be his political benefit. The comment that Gruber made about, you had to rely upon the fact that people were idiots in order to get anything done. It's a paraphrase. I know you know what I'm talking about, and if you want to put it in better words, you can. Let me just pose my question. Isn't he right, Gruber? Isn't it a political fact, not an economic fact, not a social scientific fact, but a kind of political psychological, which I suppose is social science fact, that you can't really tell the people the truth, that everything is behind a veil, that there are all these fictions. Social Security itself is a fiction, isn't it? At some level, Larry, where people think they're getting back what they paid in and so forth and so on. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I'm trying to make this point that, for example, there are these people who say, I live in the real world. I'm the reality-based community, And I'm thinking, yeah, and part of the real world is the fact that a lot of people live in fictitious communities. And indeed, the art of persuasion is significantly a matter of veil, guise, misdirection, whatever. So I should have a question here, but I expect I've said enough to provoke you into responding.
Yeah, I do want to talk about how I would fix the healthcare system, but I want to get back to respond to what you were saying. Clinton and Trump were each chosen by only 14% of the voters in the country. So what we have is two political parties who, for long time, have monopolized political power. They have a complete monopoly on political power, and then they're lying to the public. The public is really very thirsty for the truth about why it is that our real wages are not higher than they were back in 1965. If you talk about take-home pay, average weekly take-home pay, why it is that the economy is growing at a slow rate, why it is that we have so many people who are in jobs that don't pay well, or just have given up, why it is that companies are leaving the country, why it is that we spend so much time having to deal with the tax system and the social security system, why the bureaucracies have taken over. People are angry. They want answers. They worry about North Korea shooting off nuclear warheads from submarines that now have a range of 300 miles, and they could be, you're sitting in Providence, Rhode Island. There could be a nuclear submarine, not nuclear powered, but there could be a submarine with a nuclear warhead with the name North Korea on it, sitting right outside of Newport Harbor, reach your house right this minute. We don't know for sure. I doubt it, but we have to think about what's going on there too. So people, I think, want the truth, and they're very, very angry with the politicians for lying to them. Gruber, I think, had it dead wrong. I think him being part of a lying conspiracy to try and pull the rug over people's heads when it comes to what they were actually trying to do with healthcare. I think that was the wrong approach. I think that's going to be a bad thing for him for the rest of his life. He's going to regret having made those comments, but he at least was truthful about the process. Now, what would I do on healthcare? Well, I would get rid of Obamacare, I'd get rid of Medicare, I'd get rid of Medicaid, I would get rid of employer-based healthcare in terms of
Wow, Larry. You'd get rid of Medicare, you'd get rid of Medicaid, you'd ban employer-based health care.
Hang on a second. I'm going to replace all these things with a basic health plan for every American, and they're going to get it for free. So that's very different from anything we've thought about doing before.
So this is guaranteed government-funded health care for everybody.
But it's private provision, okay? So it's not a British type system or a Canadian type system. It's a much closer to a European or Israeli type system where there's competition among private providers to provide exactly the same basic healthcare plan. And if you're sick, you get a bigger voucher to buy this plan so that insurance companies don't have an incentive to cherry pick, to not take you on.
In other words, the insurance companies get to charge sick people more for the insurance than the healthy people. And the sick people are compensated for that by the government.
Yeah. Well, they don't get to charge. They get to receive a higher payment based on the person's pre-existing medical condition. That person will get a bigger voucher. He'll take it to the insurance company. The insurance company has to take the voucher, but he'll want to keep that person on as a patient and do well by that person as opposed to kick him off to some other plan.
Why do we need the insurance company? Why doesn't the government just be the single payer here?
Well, it's not an issue of a single payer. Our government is already pretty much the single payer because if you look at Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, and the tax subsidy to employer-based health care, the government's paying for 60% of all our health care in this country. So the idea that we don't already have pretty much of a single payer is off base. We actually do already have a single payer. But a single payer is not the same as a single provider. And that's what the term single payer denotes or connotes in people's minds the British healthcare system, the National Health Service, where the government micromanages every aspect of healthcare.
Okay, I get it. But why do we still need the insurance companies, even in a world where you had private providers, competitive providers?
Because we want the insurance companies to organize hiring doctors, owning hospitals or hooking up with hospitals so that the doctors themselves have the right incentives. If you think about Kaiser Permanente, they own the hospitals, they hire the doctors, they pay them a fixed salary. The doctors don't have an incentive to over-provide tests and medical, treatment and cost the system more money, nor do they have an incentive to under-provide because Kaiser Permanente wants these people to come back as customers because they're making a profit on them. So that's the idea, to have we want to make healthcare, the basic health plan that I'm talking about here, a commodity just like wheat and just like apples, make it super competitive and get all the excess costs and all the inefficiencies of the healthcare system out of it by making this a hyper-competitive market.
Are you going to regulate what's in the plans? Are you going to require that they provide the contraceptive services or that they...
Vouchers would add up to, absolutely. The vouchers would add up to 7% of GDP. It would stay at 7% of GDP. And what's covered by the basic health plan would be decided by a team of doctors, not by economists or lawyers or politicians. But it would be within a budget. So if you, Glenn, wanted to buy a supplemental policy that would give you insurance against, for having a heart transplant at 98, you could go buy a supplemental plan under this proposal. But everybody would have an identical basic plan. It wouldn't be a platinum plan or a green plan or blue plan, gold or silver. Everybody would be, look, your kidney is no better than my kidney or worse. You deserve the same basic coverage on your kidney that I do. It shouldn't be that you buy this plan and it covers your liver but not your kidney. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? And that's what we're set up here. For Medicare Part D, for example, you've got all these different insurance companies. You've got to spend hours figuring out which one you want to have because they've got your prescriptions. God forbid they don't have your prescriptions. And they can actually change your prescriptions midstream and say, okay, we don't cover that prescription anymore, that drug. Sorry, you're out of luck. Take this other drug. See if that helps you. That's not what we should have in this system. We should get rid of the adverse selection, the information problem. I'm not talking to you as an economist. And that's what making these vouchers individual specific, having the experience rating done at the individual level by a computer. And we already have this software for doing that because Medicare has software was worked out by Randy Ellis, actually, at our department, in the old, back at Boston University, where it used to be.
I remember
Randy Ellis was our colleague and still is my colleague.
Yeah.
And he developed the software that I understand Medicare is using when it provides payments to Medicare Part C Advantage plans. So this is easily done.
Okay, we're down in the weeds a little bit. What are we going to do with the seniors who are going to be disempowered a little bit by this relative to their current sweet deal with Medicare and so forth?
Well, the seniors...
are you going to grandfather them into what they've got or what?
We're not going to grandfather anybody. We shouldn't be treating seniors in terms of basic health differently than a 3-year-old. Okay, I don't think we value seniors more than an 80-year-old more than a 3-year-old. It could also
as a matter of fact, we do. I mean, the current system does do that, but
that's because the seniors are very well organized, right, and the 3-year-olds are not.
Right. And
the seniors vote on election day, and the 3-year-olds do not.
Right.
So I'm forgiving. I think the seniors realize that those 3-year-olds are their grandchildren. So we need to get everybody to understand that everybody's kids are their kids. Everybody's grandkids are their grandkids. It can't be an issue of, I'm just going to look out for myself. That's what we have in our country too much of. We have a country that, because it's so heterogeneous, we have older people who do not recognize younger people as their children. And we have to, that's unlike what happens in Sweden or Norway or Denmark, where the composition of the population is much more similar. So we have to have a president who explains to people that everybody's kids is their kids. Everybody's kid is your responsibility. You can't grab more and leave your kids with less, or somebody else's kids with less, because those kids are your kids. They're your obligation. And that's what we're doing. And so when you talk about having somebody deliver a passionate message that's actually truthful and getting to the public and getting into their heads, I'm happy to do that. I can do it just as well with you, or I can do it in front of 10,000 people. But the message will get delivered. It matters. Now, will I get traction? That's Colin Powell's responsibility at this point. Or somebody like Cameron Diaz, or Matt Damon, or Justin Bieber. It really is, because they have the power. It's their option.
Okay, let me interrupt there, because time is scarce. I got it, and more power to you. So now I want to ask you. I'm going to take you seriously as a presidential candidate. What are you going to do about radical Islamic terrorism, or whatever word you want to use to refer to the phenomenon that I'm calling attention to?
Well, I think it's fair to call it radical and terrorism and Islamic. Well, we have a lot of terrorists from all kinds of nationalities and religions and backgrounds. I think we don't want to necessarily refer to a whole group of people and give them the impression that we're calling everybody a terrorist just because they're Muslim. But titles aside, what I think we need to do in the case of ISIS is humiliate this entity. We need to not let them hold for years a city like Mosul and brag to people all around the world that they're somehow in power and in charge, and that they're now going to take over some other big city. We should have gone in right away, and it would be my policy to not let ISIS have control of any major population center. As soon as they move in, we kick them out. And we put them out into the desert, and we wipe them out to the extent we can. But I don't want to have ground troops permanently occupy any city. If we clear them out, they come back in, we'll go back in. But we're not there to stay. We're not there to do 10 years in Iraq again. And we're there also to get the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and the people from the Emirates, all the Emirates, and also the Iraqi army heavily involved in maintaining the security of these cities as we help them clear these people out. But they cannot be held up as symbols of victors in this war that they want to wage with us. They declared war on us we need to defend ourselves. We need to help, and the Europeans have to take a full part in defending Europe by getting involved in basically taking ISIS to the cleaners. And I mean very quickly and very definitively.
The Europeans, not the Gulf states?
Say again?
I said you said the Europeans, and I said not the Gulf states?
I said the Emirates. The Gulf states should certainly be playing. Their armies and their resources should be put to use here. Same with the Saudis. This is their neighborhood. They've got to be directly involved, Iraq as well, in dealing with this problem.
Okay, let me go back to the beginning of this, which was you said you don't want to call it Islamic. And I'm not taking a position one way or the other. I just want to explore the issue. And you said the reason is that people would take it to be the indictment of a whole group of people for the behavior of a small number.
I'll use the term radical Islamic terrorist.
No, it's not. This is not a test about whether you'll say the words. It's about what the ideas are and whether the Islamic character of some of this terrorism is worth noting in the context of an instrumental response to the phenomenon. Whether, for example, the propaganda or the counter-terrorist kind of intelligence that you would gather or whatever. I mean, I'm making this up. I'm not an expert in this area at all. But I'm saying, that's why I was saying at the beginning that this enterprise that you're embarked upon to be the leader of the free world, quote unquote, that there's a lot of kind of mystification, a lot of kind of orchestration, a lot of kind of performative. Its leadership is not a straight line, and it's not a purely deductive or a purely rational enterprise. This is what I'm talking about. Inspiring the people and all this kind of stuff. Iran. What do you think about the deal, the nuclear deal in Iran? How would you deal with the various provocations and conflicts? What's your vision about the role that Iran will play in that part of the world, with Iraq having been sundered and the Iranian kind of hegemonic? They're in Lebanon, they're Hezbollah, they're whatever. What's the conflict between the Saudis and the Iranians? How are you thinking about our management? Was Mubarak's being deposed a good thing? Did we, et cetera, bringing down Gaddafi and opening up a vacuum? I mean, what's your, you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I think I do. I think we have to look primarily at U.S. interests, especially our own national security. And if you think about Iran right now, they're testing 2,000-kilometer range missiles. That if they become 8,000-kilometer range missiles, and the Iranians turn around and they say, well, we're not making nuclear warheads, but we're going to go buy one from North Korea because they're right there to buy or to be given as a gift. And we can put one on top of an 8,000-kilometer warhead, then they can reach New York City. So I'm the only candidate who's gone public to say that I would, with the consent of Congress, militarily enforce a cessation, a complete ban on long-range missile testing by Iran starting day one, and also a complete ban on North Korea nuclear tests as well as missile tests of any range.
When you say enforced by military means, you mean bomb the bases from which such tested missiles would be launched?
Exactly, yes. Exactly.
Just checking.
Just checking. Well,
yeah, just want to make sure I understood.
You have two sons, I have two sons. I don't want to be, I don't think you or
I have three sons, Larry. I should correct the record. I have an older son, and then I have the two whom you know.
Yeah. Okay, sorry.
No, you didn't know. I mean, no problem.
15 years from now, we do not want to be in a situation where North Korea has 1,000 nuclear warheads and 1,000 delivery systems and ballistic missiles that can hit anywhere in the U.S. and hit anywhere our kids live and anybody else's kids. We do not want that because that country, just like Iran, is being run by people that we don't feel are fully rational. We don't think, I think the Iranians are much more rational than the North Koreans, but I think we have to deal with these countries with absolute firmness. We have to say there's a line, and you've just crossed that line, and you're not going to do it again. Because if you do that again, if you do, like they did 2 weeks ago, shoot off a last week I think they test fired 3 missiles from land in North Korea. The week before they test fired a missile out of a submarine. A couple weeks before that, they did a ballistic missile into outer space that came back down. We have to tell them no more tests. And if you violate that, we start seeing you preparing for a test. We're going to take out everything you have with respect to nuclear facilities, with respect to launching pads. We're going to take out all your submarines in an afternoon. And it's going to be end of game over for you folks. And then if you want to proceed to try and bomb Seoul, we're going to take out you, the great leader, the next minute, okay, with whatever means it's going to take, and we're going to get rid of you, and you're not going to be around again. So if you talk to them with that kind of language and also say, but on the other hand, we're ready to end the Korean War. We're ready to sit down with you, sign a peace treaty, normalize relations, have full fair trade, and hopefully you and South Korea can get together over time and form and reunite. We're here to work with you, but we're not here to let you threaten our children. That's not our goal, and we're not going to permit it.
Are you going to run this by the Chinese first, or what?
No, I don't think the Chinese are particularly. We've been having negotiations with the North Koreans, the Chinese, and ourselves, occasionally the Russians, for 35 years. The Chinese have never picked up the telephone that Donald Trump wants them to pick up and made the 5-minute conversation that Donald Trump thinks it's going to take to get North Korea to change its ways. So no, I don't think we're going to need to beg the Chinese to do our job. The Chinese are not responsible for our national security, and the threats that are being made are not being made to the Chinese; are being made daily by the North Korean government about our country. They're saying daily, we're going to fire on a peremptory basis nuclear missiles at the United States.
Okay.
At any time.
Excuse me for interrupting, Larry. Again, time is short, and there's so much to talk about. Let me take you back to being an economist and ask you about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and about NAFTA and about Ford making small cars in Mexico and so forth and so on. What is your general philosophy and your sort of policy framework for thinking about international trade and American economic security?
Okay, well, I'm very much in favor of free and full international trade. I think any economist who's kind of trained in economics would understand the advantages of trade. I mean, if just to give your listeners a kind of a sense of the importance of this. I mean, imagine we cut off all trade, first with China, then with Mexico, then with Canada, then with Europe, and we just traded among ourselves. And then we had the states decide to trade only among themselves. So Massachusetts could not trade with any other state. And then we had the cities inside Massachusetts say they're not going to trade with anybody. So Boston would have no trade. We'd have to grow our own crops, for example, and get our own oil out of the ground. We have no oil.
I got it to be a miserable life for everybody. I got that.
Yeah. So trade is very important, and to willy-nilly say that NAFTA has hurt our workers, and the trading and the China is taking us to the cleaners with no proof. This is what Trump is saying. This is the statements of a demagogue.
Okay, excuse me. Let's keep Trump out of it. I really just want to talk about. I mean, I grant you that he's a demagogue, okay, and I grant you that this issue is disconnected from any kind of analytic framework of where the benefits are actually coming from. It's all about banner waving. This is what I was talking about before. It's all about sloganeering. It's all about banner waving. It's visceral. It plays to people's fears and their whatever. Trump is a practitioner of it. He may be the better of the two practitioners of that art in this particular election, but he certainly didn't originate it. And everybody who gets anywhere in that game plays it to a T. Okay? Ronald Reagan has somehow gone into American iconography as a Rushmore-esque visionary uniting figure of great grandeur. Now, just imagine that. Imagine that. I know you know what I'm talking about. We were both there. Not that Ronald Reagan was Darth Vader. He was not. But he was also not George Washington either. But he has become the 20th century George Washington. So if that can happen, Larry.
A lot of, people say a lot of things.
But I want to talk about trade. I'm sorry. Okay.
Trade. Well, on TPP, as I understand it, there are 4 parts of it. The trade economists I've talked to who've looked at this think that overall it's a great deal for the U.S. And so I would want to I haven't really studied it carefully. There might be a couple sections where I would have some concerns about monopolization by or if, for example, a U.S. company, an oil company that was trying to restrict a foreign government from engaging in prevention of CO2 emissions, and they sued them, that could be a concern. So there are some concerns that have been raised that sound legitimate, but overall, what I've understood, I believe is the case from what I've heard. TPP sounds like a good deal for the U.S. So we should have an intelligent discussion. We should have somebody, somebody's running. Well, I could figure it out by spending the time, but I've been working on some other issues at this point.
But you're going to have to go to the American people and tell them it's quite all right that all the small forts are made in Mexico. It's quite all right that no televisions are manufactured in the United States. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's quite all right that iPhones and iPads and iMacs are being assembled in China. There is no problem with that. I was just in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, man. The joint is jumping down there. You know what I'm saying? They're chomping at the bit. I'm sure and everything was as cheap as it could possibly be. I'm sure and they are smart, energetic, industrious people. I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be doing something that somebody in America is doing right now. You're going to have to tell the American people that. And then you're going to have to tell us, what are we going to do with the people who are displaced, or the people who, like in that J.D. Vance book that I'm so fond of, Hillbilly Elegy, which I highly recommend to your attention, who basically are just kind of, or the ghetto that I grew up in on the south side of Chicago, which is falling apart and which has Donald Trump prancing around talking about how he's going to be the Messiah who's going to bring back prosperity to the inner city. Of course, it's a complete crock. But the very fact of it is indicative of how marginalized these people are. Now, you saw what happened in Brexit. There are a lot of people who are not on the upside of having a internet cafe with really good coffee sitting on the avenue in the middle of the city somewhere, or being able to go online and find out what's going on in Indian politics in Mumbai right now. There are a lot of people who are not on the upside of that. What are you going to tell them while you're telling them that it doesn't matter where Ford makes their small cars? It doesn't matter where Apple assembles its electronic devices and so forth and so on. So that's the politics of it, you know.
But Switzerland has a very high per capita. Here's the thing. There are countries like Switzerland that do not have car companies. They have very high per capita GDPs, and they have much more equality. So there's other countries that are getting this right. They're educating their kids differently. If I were elected president, I would be getting the Swiss over here the next day to really help us figure out how to reorganize our educational system. I would be using the internet so that every kid in the country had the best lectures. Part of their curriculum would be online learning from the best teachers in the country, so that we had uniform education in small pods where each person could learn to work at his own pace, so you have, in effect, effectively smaller class size. I would use this new technology to our advantage so that we could get some equality of education and opportunity through that channel. As for people in poverty, first of all, I would legalize drugs to the extent they were not sold to children and there was no violence involved with them, so that we would not be having these gang wars in places like Chicago. You know, over Memorial Day, something like 67 people were shot in Chicago and over that weekend. That's like a bomb going off in Baghdad.
Yeah.
We're immune. These things are happening all the time in the U.S. We think we're shocked by Iraq, what's going on there, but we're not shocked by what's going on here.
Amen.
One of the things we have, one of the big problems we have, I think, is too many low-skilled immigrants coming into the country that are competing with many low-skilled workers in the U.S.
How did Red Fox? You remember Red Fox? Oh, this is the big one. Come on, you really said that, Laurence Kotlikoff, man. I love you. You really said that. That's the most politically incorrect thing I've ever heard of.
I'm not into politically incorrect, Glenn. I'm into fixing the country and telling the truth about our economic situation. I think if you were to bring in 1 million economists, professors of economics, every year, into our country, economists would be outraged. Because our salaries would go way down.
We'd also be poor. We'd be impoverished.
We'd be impoverished. So if you're bringing in 1 million immigrants a year, which is what we're doing, 850,000 of which are low-skilled, then you're putting a lot of pressure on our low-skilled and middle-skilled workers. So I think we should cut that number in half. And here, I'll get back to why. I think we should cut our legal immigration. We don't really have an illegal immigration problem because we're losing more illegal immigrants than we're gaining. If we put up that wall, not that I would let illegal people get into the country, but the wall, just think about it. We've got more people trying to leave than come illegally. And so if we put up the wall, we would actually have more illegal immigrants because we keep them from leaving. And that's what Trump wants to do. That's because he can't think beyond what his image tells him in the mirror. So I would change the skill mix of the 500,000 immigrants to a much more higher skilled composition of immigrants to take some of the pressure. I would eliminate the poverty trap that our tax and transfer system is posing. If you look at my platform, the reason I spent 6 months, or not, no, I spent from basically February through May writing this book, a 160-page book, is I had to figure out a little more than I knew about how to fix the tax system in combination with fixing the welfare system, in combination with fixing the health system and the Social Security system, so that poor people, when they go to work, they don't lose 22 cents in the earned income tax credit, 23 cents in food stamps, their Medicaid benefits, or 25 cents in their Obamacare subsidies, and then housing support, and then have to pay payroll taxes, and then have to pay state income taxes and state sales taxes.
So these are because of means testing. I just want to make sure everybody understands, because of the fact that people's benefits for these various subsidies are diminished when their own earnings increases. That operates like a tax on those earnings, and it disincentivizes those people to go out and find employment and to get themselves out of poverty. So what are you going to do about that? How do you fix that?
So we have a poverty trap, and my reforms of all these different institutions end up with everybody paying 33% in terms of a tax bracket on their wages, but the rich are taxed on their consumption. There's getting rid of the federal income tax, the corporate income tax, the estate and gift tax. I'm replacing that with no ceiling on the payroll tax, an inheritance tax over $5 million at 20%, a value-added tax of 20%, and a progressive consumption tax that kicks in at $100,000 of personal consumption, and that goes from 5% up to 30% in terms of the rate. So the rich are going to be taxed on...
I'm not rich, Larry, and you just raised my taxes considerably. No ceiling on the payroll tax?
No ceiling.
You talking about FICA?
Everybody's going to be paying 30% effectively through the FICA tax, which is 15%. The value-added tax is effectively a 15% tax on wages. So the 30% tax comes from those two sources. Okay. Everybody, no matter rich, poor, are going to pay, middle class, are all going to pay that same proportional tax rate.
Okay.
So we're going to get rid of this poverty trap that we've had for decades. You know, I worked for the Council of Economic Advisors under Reagan. Glenn, I don't know if you recall this.
Oh, that was in the first couple of years of the first term.
Right? I was involved in writing the first economic report of the president.
Right.
I did not for Reagan, just to be clear.
Yeah.
I'm an independent. I've always been independent.
Sure.
I didn't vote for him. I didn't think he was really up to the job, to tell you the truth. And
was it Marty Feldstein who brought you in?
No, this was Murray Wiedenbaum.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things I wrote, which got me close to being fired, was that when you take, we had at the time the AFDC program,
that was before 10.
Age of Family Dependent Children program. And it used to be that if you earned before Reagan got in, if you earned $1, you'd lose 66 cents. When he got into office, he raised that to if you earn $1, you lose $1. So right there by itself, you have all welfare recipients being told, don't work. Guess what? Do not work because you're going to lose money. Just your welfare benefit, you'll lose dollar for dollar. So I said that this was exactly antithetical to the supply-side economic philosophy, exactly the wrong thing to do. I got it, even though it was censored by the Treasury. Murray Wiedenbaum, to his credit, let it, pushed it through, and it got published, and it got printed in the Washington Post, and then I almost got fired because the White House sent over, actually Health and Human Services, which was run by some kind of a racist, had a meeting of about 10 people together, including a guy named Bob Carlson, who was a friend of Reagan's, and they sent Carlson over to Murray Wiedenbaum and said, fire this guy. And Wiedenbaum kicked him out of the office. That's an example.
That's a war story. Let me ask you something else, Larry, since we're talking economics. Minimum wage, $15 an hour?
I'm part of my tax plan, which I haven't mentioned, is a $2,000 per person payment, lump sum, like a negative income tax payment. Everybody gets it, young, old, rich, poor, $2,000 per head. So I think that minimum wages are a transfer from some working people to other working people, from working people that don't have jobs or can't get jobs or are going to lose their jobs, to people that will be able to keep their jobs. So I don't think we should be in this country where we have super rich people like Trump be trying to redistribute from some poor people to other poor people. I think we should be redistributing from the super rich to the poor. And so I think if you talk about the minimum wage in terms of what it actually means for the poor who don't get a job, you understand that this is really what's going on. It's a redistribution among the poor. And when Bernie Sanders starts preaching that the minimum wage is the answer to eliminate and reduce poverty, it's because he has no economics training. Because it's not that he doesn't have a great heart, but he just doesn't know what he's talking about at a very basic level.
Well, Paul Krugman is also supporting this, what I would call nonsense about the minimum wage, but then I'll get into trouble if I say that. But I mean, so it's not just that a person doesn't have economics training, and I know that there are a ton of people who know better who are out there saying this same stuff about give America a raise. One of them's name is Larry. One of them's name is Barack Hussein Obama. We're going to give America a raise. Let me ask you another question about the labor market. What about equal pay to women for work of comparable value? What about that? What about increasing bureaucracy and restraints on the private sector in order to ensure that there's gender equity in the pay that people get? Because don't you know, Larry, that women are making 70 cents on the dollar compared to men?
Well, I think we have a terrible problem with bureaucracy in our country. I have a small company. We make personal financial planning software. I see this bureaucracy. I just got a call an hour ago from the state of Washington, from their tax division, and starting to ask me questions about where we're going to have to be subject to their tax. You have to realize that a small business that tries to operate in 50 states in this country has to potentially file 200 tax returns, a use tax, a franchise tax, a sales tax, and a corporate income tax, and plus other annual reports. It is a nightmare before you even get to the federal corporate tax. So we have a bureaucracy there in terms of our state tax system that's incredibly detrimental to economic progress. I talk about that in the book and how I would change that. We have a federal income tax that's just a minefield of provisions. A Social Security system that's got hundreds of thousands of rules that nobody can remotely understand, that people are getting screwed on all the time. The GAO yesterday came out with a study, just yesterday, saying that Social Security's staff is systematically making significant mistakes, because they've actually sat there and observed them dealing with customers, and time after time they're telling people the wrong thing. We have a healthcare system where, if you get sick in a hospital and you move next door to another hospital, right across the street, or even actually two parts of the same hospital, they can't communicate with each other. They can't figure out that you actually had that test a week ago, and they want to send you for the same test. I mean, we're wasting money like crazy in the healthcare system. So what I'm proposing are things that are going to get rid of that bureaucracy. Now, back to the 70 cents for the women versus the dollar for the men, I think we need to have laws that people can use, and institutions where people can appeal for equal treatment under the law. I think we needed a civil rights law. We need a a law that allows females to sue if they're not being fairly paid. What we can't have is bureaucracy that basically kills the goose in the process. So we have to have good government, not no government. So I think we need government in many, many places. And I'm all for good government. I think we have lousy, dysfunctional government everywhere you look. And I'm for fixing it. And the right way, the way I think you and I were taught to do it.
Yeah.
And I want to bring professional expertise. If you like, I'm a technocrat. I'm not a bureaucrat. I'm not a politician. I'm somebody who can fix America.
I like it, Larry. I like it. We're almost at the end of the hour. Let me just ask you one last question.
I'm not the only one that can fix America.
Very good. You can fix it. Yeah.
I'm not the only one. I'm not saying this out of pride or a super big ego that I need this job to make myself sleep at night. I don't, okay? I'm doing this because I've studied these problems. I see, it's like an engineer who sees a bridge being built the wrong way. He, just out of professionalism, he'd want to go and tell these people, here's how to fix it. Here's how to set it up so nobody gets hurt. That's where I'm coming from. And right now, legally, the only person in between Clinton and Trump and the American public. I want people to go away with that message.
That's better. That's a better stump speech than I heard either of them give. I think it's brilliant. And more power to you, as I say. But I want to ask you about Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. Can you say All Lives Matter, or have you got that one figured out yet? If you're going to be president, you're going to have to figure that one out.
Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, everybody's lives matter. But we have a problem of bigoted police, racist police, treating blacks differentially from whites, and we have to deal with that problem. And so one thing I've called for is that police have non-lethal weapons at their disposal. So it shouldn't be a case that a policeman stops somebody who's driving because they got a bad tail light and comes to the window with a gun, that they've got their hand on their gun, and the guy reaches for his license, and then he's shot to death by the policeman. If the policeman makes a mistake, and it's a legitimate mistake, he should have a stun gun or some other kinds of method to disarm somebody he thinks is going to cause him injury. But to have a loaded pistol, a weapon, to be using that as the first means of responding, to me, is inappropriate. So I think we should also, in dealing with terrorism, have a large number of Americans who are very well vetted, deputized to carry non-lethal weapons to defend themselves. We should not have a situation where a terrorist can get into a nightclub, lock the door, and then proceed with an AR-15 to start shooting people at will for hours. We need to have people inside that room. We need to have, the NRA. No, I'm not a supporter of the NRA, but they have a point. They have a point.
Yeah, I see that. I see what you're saying. You want to substitute the more nearly universal possession of non-lethal force for this kind of everybody being their own fully armored, gun-toting self-defense operation. And I think that's an idea. That's the first time I've heard that, and I think that's interesting. Okay, Larry, got to call it to a close. Thank you. And again, let me apologize to you because I came at you so aggressively as if the idea were ridiculous that you would run for president. And at the end of the hour, I'm really a bit humbled by the fact that you care enough about the country that you're prepared to put this much of your life into an enterprise like this where, you got to admit it, the odds of success are relatively low. But nevertheless, more power to you. I'll say it again. I've really learned a lot from talking to you, and I'm glad you shared with our audience here at the Glenn Show, man. Really.
Thank you, Glenn. I love you, and we're great friends. So peace, man. Thank you.
Okay, so bye-bye to Bridget as well.
Okay. Thanks, man.
Bye.
See you.